Hello, in this video we'll take a look at how to create a boreal forest biome, like the one you see in this viewport. This is a complex terrain which includes water simulation, snow simulation, and other complex nodes. It is divided into three graphs. The terrain graph consists of the shape for the terrain itself and the textures. Then we have the rivers and lakes for water production. And finally, the snow and vegetation graph. Now I'm also rendering in the background, but I don't think it will be a problem. So let's start with the shape of the terrain itself. I knew that I wanted a valley with forest and lakes and background mountains towards the north. So to achieve this, I created a ridge node, which is useful for creating background mountains as well as close-up of parts of a mountain. Default settings, I simply change the seed. I then created a range node, which is again another useful node for creating a lot of mountains or rocky details, it depends. In this case, I chose the high altitude, which creates a lot of rocky formations with low scale, and then again I change the seed to get something that I like. I combined it with the ridge max method, so we take only the highest points into account, ratio 100%, and this is the result. To give it some randomness, I connected it to a warp node, size to a small amount, also the strength to a small amount, roughness to get more details, and simply change the seed to something you like. Then we have the shaper. Because I wanted to bulk those mountains, I didn't want these peaks. Instead, I wanted a more hill formation, so I used the shaper node. Local effect enabled, so only the highest peaks are taken into account, shape to 46%. I then combine it with a rocky node. The rocky node is a very useful node to add rocks onto a surface. This is just the default settings. I will change the seed, and then we have this result here, which may look chaotic. In fact, it is, but after we will apply the erosion, we'll see that the details we get from the rocky node makes tons of difference. To combine it with the shaper, I use the embed method, which basically take the rocky node, the rocks of the rocky node, and place them inside this terrain here. So we have this result. We have then our erosion node. These are all custom settings. You also have the presets if you want. If you're starting out, it's a good practice to check them out and see the various parameters. But if you are an intermediate user or an expert one, I recommend using your own custom settings. Play around with the duration, rock softness, and so on. In this case, I use 32% of duration, which is a lot. If you don't have a powerful CPU, I recommend maybe increasing the strength or and the downcutting instead of the duration, because the erosion node is a heavy node to calculate. Rock softness to 30% because I wanted the rocks to be hard, not soft, so we don't lose many details. Random sedimentation is useful for creating those rocks that scatters onto the terrain. However, with sediment removal, you will get a lot of downcutting. So instead of increasing the downcutting, which may takes more computational time, this combo is a good one. Random sedimentation with the sediment removal. We are now at the first choke point. Now a choke point, you can find it under utilities. Choke point is a null node, which means is useless. Its only function is to remind you that this graph continues in another one. In this case, I made this choke point because I'm going to create rivers, all the water production, and then you will see that I'll get back again to this graph to improve the shape even more. And I also made a portal in the output, so we can go to the rivers and lakes graph and take a look at the rivers node. As you can see, I have my choke point here in the input. I call it erosion height, so I know that the choke point is connected to the erosion. If you never used the rivers node, it's very straightforward. It simply creates rivers on your terrain by carving out the terrain itself. In fact, right now we have the water, but if I go, for example, here, it carved out all the river. So we have an actual river, not only the albedo. I wanted large rivers with a lot of water. So what I did was to increase the headwaters to a maximum, which means there are many points where the rivers can start. So we have one here, another one here, here, so many points. Water to the default, width to 60%, so they are larger. Depth to 100, which is the depth of the water, and downcutting to 20%. Be careful with the downcutting because it will also carve out all your surroundings. So if we take a look at the mountain, this is the result with the carving of water. This was before. Now there are also shadows. I don't know if you can see it, but they are basically more deep. I took the depth of the rivers, connected to an FX node. I call it river mask because it's the mask of the river. We will need it later on. I enable the auto level, logarithmic scaling, so we get all the rivers, and more importantly, they are all at the same value in terms of white, which is very important for masking. I also blurred them a little bit because, you know, I don't like that pixel effect that you get with a lot of masks. It's not needed, but I recommend it because you will get a smoother result. Okay, then I connected the output of the rivers to the lakes to create lakes. Lakes is also straightforward. I simply bumped up the precipitation to 20 and this is it. So we get small lakes. However, I also chose where the rain will fall. So using a mask node. Sorry, I have a... Okay, let me pin this. Okay, take the mask node, click on edit mask, and you can draw your mask. In this case, I chose two regions where I wanted the lakes to be formed, and this will drive the rain. In practice, it will rain only in these two areas. For the first output, well, it's simply the height map, which I connected to a choke point. I call it rivers plus lakes height, and in fact I then combined it in the terrain graph, but we will take a look at it later. In any case, we know that we must go to another graph to continue working. The second output is the lakes, which is used for masking. As always, I blurred it a little bit and combined it with the rivers. Method to max, so we get well, both rivers and lakes. Now notice how the rivers blend very well with the lakes. This is very important because here in the masking for the rivers we enable the level and logarithmic scale. By doing this you can blend it with the lakes without any problem. Otherwise you will see that the rivers continue into the lake, and this obviously is not realistic. For the color production of the water, both rivers and lakes, I use the depth of the lakes, connected it to a warp node, and also remember to pin the lakes for as pin as underlay, otherwise you cannot see the colors precisely. I enable the auto level and shaper. This is also very important because exactly like the mask, if you don't enable the auto level and shaper with to a high degree value like 60%, you'll see that the rivers will appear on top of the lake or below the lake. Regarding the warp, I chose a small amount for the size and strength, so we get a lot of ripples and wispiness on the water. I also increased the roughness and iterations to 5. If you can increase it more if you want, but like if you want a very turbulent lake, you can increase it. But lakes are not turbulent; they are not like the ocean. So I think 5 is okay. I then connected another warp, same thing, auto level, without the shaper because we already had the previous one. I enable the min, so the water doesn't go too much on top of the rocks. The values are mostly the same. I simply increase the size to create bigger waves and lower the strength. Finally, the color, simply a clutter node with custom gradient. And that is it for the water production phase. We have now our choke point. So we go back to the terrain shape graph, this one. I made a combine node and I combined the previous choke point, which is simply the erosion output, okay, with the rivers and lakes that we made before. So I made a portal for this choke point and simply connected here, okay. Combined blend 100%, and now we have this result here with the lakes and the rivers on our terrain. I connected an anastomosis, which is useful for detailing, and then another choke point. This is the end of the shape of the terrain itself, and we are now going into the snow and vegetation graph. I made the portal, so snow and vegetation, here we go. If you want, you can pin a choke point as underlay. And here you will have the arboreal nodes and the snowfall. If you are simulating snow, I recommend creating the vegetation and the snow in the same graph so you can visualize where the snow will fall. Because obviously if you have a lot of snow, then the vegetation won't look right. First of all, I made an arboreal node for the conifers, which are the trees, as you can see here. The first input should be the choke point of your shape graph, so the one connected to the anastomosis. For the mask, I used the combined water mask in the water graph here, this one, combined water mask. In fact, I made a portal, if you notice. By doing this, we will mask out the zones with rivers and lakes. So vegetation won't grow into them. As you can see, the trees are actually avoiding the water. There is an option here, flowing water avoid. Usually for conifers, you want this option enabled, but for more aggressive plants like the shrubs, you want it to be too sick. But let's proceed with order. Regarding the conifers, I choose conifers. And this default style to large, this is up to you. If you want small trees, you can set it to small. Growth to wild, because we are in a wild region, you don't want the trees to be perfectly aligned. Flowing water, avoid, so we avoid the rivers and lakes. Flows 20%. If you decrease it, you will get more trees. If you increase it, they will avoid the water even more, so you'll get less trees. Then you have altitude max, slope max. I didn't want the trees to grow on top of the mountain, so I chose a low altitude. Slope max to 40 degrees is more or less realistic. Patches, if you increase this value, you will get more dead zones inside the trees. if you decrease it, you get more trees that are clumped together. Chaos for randomization, and this is it. We have three outputs. The first output is the height map, because the arboreal node is not like the vegetation node, which is only color. Arboreal are actual geometry, so you may want them or not. In my opinion, if you're doing aerial rendering like this, they look good. But if you want to render them up close, then I recommend exporting your terrain only like this, okay? Without the arboreal, and use the arboreal only for masking and dictate where the vegetation will grow inside your 2D application like Blender or Maya, whatever. In fact, we have the first output is for the height map that goes to the snowfall. Second output are the trees, which is the masking. Then we have the third output, which is the color guide that is used for the coloration later on. I connected the output of Arboreal, the first output of the snowfall. And before taking a look at the values, I also made a sunlight node with equalization on, so we get brighter areas, which means the sun will be stronger. The white areas are the one where the sun will melt the snow greatly compared to the black areas. I chose a north direction of 65 degrees, and the rest is default, and the input is connected again to the anastomosis height, which is the choke point, this one. The sunlight should be connected to the melt input of your snowfall. Regarding the snowfall, duration default, intensity to 40%, because for this terrain I made quite intense snowfall simulation, because there is a trick for the snow to look good. Notice how the snow forms these very nice details, which are simply based on the mountain beneath. To get these details, you must use a strong snowfall simulation with a lot of settled thaw. I set it to 100%, and quite high melting value. The scale, real scale. Advanced adhered snow mass. This dictates the amount of snow that will stick to the surface. These two values, slip of angle and adhered snow mass, work together. I then connected the first output to another arboreal node for creating the shrubs. The second output is for coloration. I simply use the preset here for the clutter node, check for snow. And then the third output is the mask. I also blurred it a little bit. For the second arboreal node, the shrubs, I chose the type shrubs. You can also use broadleaf, but in my opinion there is no point. Health to 15% because we are not in a jungle, so I didn't want the shrubs to go overboard. In fact, I also reduced the density to 20%. Style to large plus fuzzy, as the name implies, they are large and blurred a little bit. Growth wild, again, we are in a, let's say, pristine environment. Flowing water sick, because shrubs as well as many other plants are aggressive. They will go where the water is. In this case here there is a river, so they are towards the river. Flows 90%. Consolidated flows, this if you increase it you will get more shrubs in the same point. Then I change the altitude, the slope, a little bit of chaos for randomization, and this is it. I made a portal for the first output, which is the height map, then third output for coloration, and the second output for masking. It's an FX node, auto level, and this is it. We now have finished all the preparations for the terrain, so we are going to color it. Now for coloration, I recommend pinning this choke point, so pin as underlay, and then when we finished making the texture for the terrain, the mountains, valley, etc., we can pin the arboreal shrubs, coloring the trees and the plants. and also to visualize the final terrain, because this is a boreal forest with a forest. Let's go to the textures graph, which is quite big. It's not complex, but well, here it gets a little bit complex, but not too much. As always, for the data nodes, I use the texture node default settings. All the data nodes are connected to the anastomosis height, which is the choke point. Multifractal default settings aside equalization, which is on, so all the peaks will be at the same height more or less, and we get the maximum elevation possible. Slope node default settings. Rock map, I blurred it a little bit and also inverted it. Protrusion is useful for the highest points of your rocky formations. And finally we have the angle, which I blurred a little bit again. The angle is more or less hit or miss. I don't always use it, but if you can use it, it will improve your textures even more. Okay, let's start from the top. First of all, we must create the colors for the valley and the mountains in general. In this case, I chose a set map, which I combined with a more grayish tone looking set map. Blend 40%, we get this result. I then made another set map for a valley, a green one, which I combined. Blend 50% using the slope as a mask. I wanted to color the highest peaks, which means the protrusions. So I chose blue set map, which I combined with the previous combine node. Power method 30%, so we get more contrast. The areas masked by the protrusion node will be darker. Then I use another combine node with the blend method again, but I also, instead of the data nodes, I use the multifractal node as a masking node, and I used this very black set map, so we get more grayish and white tone going on the terrain. Now I selected this set map, green with white colors. Yes, in some of the set map I changed the bias. Now the bias is used to shift the color. For example, here I have a bias of 2% and it looks like this. If I go toward the right, I'll get more green, so like this, it's we have more green. Bias is very useful. I don't always use it, it depends on the map. In any case, I combine it using the inverted rock map as a masking node, so you get this result here with the multiply. Then I chose this very chaotic set map because I used the angle. Angle works better with set maps that has many colors. In fact, we now get this result here using the divide method. So this is before, which looks quite nice, but as you can see, with the angle we improve it even more. Color correction using the color FX node, and we get this result here. And now we start to get into the complex stuff. First of all, I created a vegetation node for the grass. We have grass scattered around because obviously if you have trees, shrubs, plants, various types of plants, you also have grass. Wild grass, probably. I connected the first input to the color FX node and the second input, which means the height map, to the anastomosis height, as I did with the other data nodes. I increased the occurrence because I wanted more grass and the density, as well as the slope bottom to 30%, so we get more grass in the lower areas and not on the top. In fact, slope top is set to 0%. I connected the second output, the distance output of a vegetation, to an FX node because this is used for masking. So we have a combined node, which I called water plus snow mask. In fact, we have the first input, which is the combined water mask, this one. The second input is the blur snow mask, so is this one. I combine them using a max method 100%, so we get both masks at the highest values. And I also inverted the node, so the water areas are black as well as the snow areas, which means the grass won't grow there. I combined the combined node in the vegetation node with an FX node, which I called grass mask. The combined is connected to the mask of the FX node, and the second output, the distance node of the vegetation, to the first input of the FX. I then use an auto level just to be sure that all the values are white. I then made a combined node. First input, the terrain without the grass. Second input, the terrain with the grass, but it's not masked yet. And for the masking input, I chose the combined node. So this is the result. If you get closer, this is the vegetation node without the masking. And this is with the masking. So the rivers are completely free of grass, as well as the snow areas. Then I added the snow. So another combined, which I combined with the previous one. Second input. Now, by default, the snow, if you use that preset for the clutter, the snow is very, very bright for my taste. So I simply connect the clutter snow color, this one, to the input of a color FX node and lower the lightness to 0.8, 0.9, whatever. So we get a less bright snow, which looks more realistic. I then connected the blur snow mask to the mask node of the combine. And there we go, we have snow, vegetation, and the textures for the other parts of the terrain. Another combine, I connected the second input to the portal of the clutter lakes color, so this one. And for masking, the water mask. And there we go, blend 100%. And this is the terrain without trees. Then we have all the arboreal color phase. I made a combined node. Now let me pin the arboreal. So I made a combined node set to blend 100%. The second input is connected to this small graph. Now you need a color for your trees. You can use a single set map or you can use multiple set map. I use two set maps. One has this green color, the other one has this reddish color, but with also some green. Notice how the bias is 30% because I wanted more red instead of green. Both set maps are connected to the arboreal shrubs height map, the first output. I combine them, blend 100%, and for masking I used a pairing node set to equalization, scale 3% so we get a lot of variations, and I change the seed to something that I like. Basically the highest points is where the red color will appear. So let's take for example this part here, and in fact we have some red color. Then I connect it to the combine here and we have the coloration for the trees. The masking of the combine node is connected to the color guide of the conifers, so the tiered output, this one. Okay, color guide. Arboreal shrubs, same thing. I chose two set maps connected to the height map of the arboreal shrubs again. So this green tone, another green tone combined. Then we have the masking. Instead of connecting to the color guide of the conifers, we connect it to the color guide of the shrubs. So this one. Blend 100%. And this is the end of this complex terrain. I hope you enjoyed this video. If that's the case, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe to stay up to date with the latest contents. If you have any question, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.